So we have Suresh, do we?
Yes, sir.
Please.
Please state your full name
Suresh Vaghela.
and repeat after me. I swear by the Gita that the evidence I shall give
I swear by the Gita that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Suresh, you have severe haemophilia A,
Yeah, absolutely.
and your older brother Praful also had haemophilia.
Yes,
Now, between 1979 and 1983, you attended a particular college, Hereward College,
in Coventry.
and that was a college specifically for students who had some form of disability.
Yeah, and it was one of the. There were two colleges. So one was Trelaws and the other was Hereward, and I was sent there, and it was one of the best colleges that I can name around the country.
And you did your GCSEs, your A-levels and your A-levels there,
Yeah,
and you were treated with Factor 8 products whilst you were there,
yeah.
but you'd also had Factor 8 products the year before in 1978.
Yeah, that was in Lancaster. The first time I ever had Factor 8 was in Lancaster. I can't remember whether it was dental extractions or whatever, but it was there, and that was the one and only time. Because when my brother and I, or the family, came over from East Africa, we had dealings with the hospital, and the treatment was such that it made us bleed profusely. So we took the decision not to go to the hospital at all, because if they were making things worse, the option was to keep ourselves better. But then a time came when dental extractions and stuff, and the first Factor 8 treatment was Lancaster.
And you don't know whether it was the treatment in Lancaster in 1978 or the Factor 8 you received during your time at the college that caused your infection?
I can't be certain.
You've described Factor 8 as having seemed like a magic potion that gave you greater freedom.
Oh, absolutely. It was the treatment of the time, because in the days of old, you'd have a bleed and you'd be stuck in the bed or a chair, and weeks on end will pass by. You'll see your friends playing, and you'll be excluded from a life that you think, well, I know this is the time for me to play, And so when we used to have, that was prior to Lancaster, and then from Lancaster onwards, we thought, why wasn't I aware of this Factor 8 before? Because you'd have a jab, and within a couple of days you'd be back up again. And we just couldn't believe that this was out there. And had we missed it all these years, because we'd opted out of the health system, by our own choice, because the treatment wasn't to our needs.
And whether at Lancaster or at Hereward College, were you ever given any advice or warnings or information about any risks of infection?
Oh, none whatsoever.
Now, you understand from your medical records that in the late 1970s you were infected with hepatitis B.
Yeah.
And we'll just put a couple of documents up on screen. Suresh, first of all, Paul, could we have 1577002, please? So this is a later letter from 1990, but if we look about 7 or 8 lines down, we would see a passage beginning in 1978. He was tested and found to be hepatitis B surface antigen negative. And in April 1979, I found a record of a test which suggested he was surface antibody positive. Just pausing there, were you aware that you were being tested for hepatitis B?
No, all these tests were carried out, and being a haemophiliac, they normally test for, to see what your Factor 8 levels are, and are you getting enough or not, and all those kind of things. So, and occasionally they'd check if you got inhibitors. So those are the two that we were aware of, but everything else was added to the cocktail, and we had absolutely no idea what we were being sort of tested for.
And you weren't aware of the results of any tests either?
None.
And if we just continue with that passage, we'll see it refers then to in 1981 you being admitted to Woolsgrove Hospital near Coventry with jaundice, which lasted 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And it described you being quarantined. Now, your recollection is that was in fact early 1980.
Yeah.
And if we just have up on screen, please, Paul, 1577003, we can see that the last three entries on that page, there's a reference 16th of January 1980 to being jaundice, and then the 17th of January, probably hepatitis B, and then what looks like probably the 21st of January reference again there. That's your recollection of this episode described in the letter of you being jaundiced and quarantined.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that?
It was, once again, back at the college. I'm one of the haemophilia. I mean, everybody has sort of mild, moderate and severe haemophilia, and sometimes even the moderate ones bleed more than the severe. So it's just how life kind of deals the cards. And I was one of the haemophiliacs that bled quite a bit, and every week I'd have a bleed of some sort, whether it's the arm, whatever it was. And then, but this particular time, both my shoulders came up, both my knees came up, and both my elbows, both my ankles came up. And I couldn't work it out because I hadn't done anything. The only thing I did was go from my room to the refectory for some food and come back. And the next thing I know, all these bleeds have started. And the college said, we can't look after you because you need hospital care. So they sent me in. When I came out, a couple of weeks later or whatever, my friend says, your eyes looking a bit yellow. And I said, no, I think I'm fine because I've just come out of hospital. They'll have tested me for all of this. And he goes, no, you definitely look yellow. And when I saw the nurse in charge, she said, oh, no, we've been expecting this. So I don't know what they were expecting, when they were expecting it, and how they were expecting it, because I had no idea of what plan they had, but they were expecting something. And then they said it was nothing to worry about, and like I said, it was something they expected. So I thought, oh, I'll just carry on my normal day. And then, so I finished my food and went back to my room, and it must have been a space of half an hour, 45 minutes. In that time, my roommate was kicked out, and the room was quarantined, plastics all over the walls, and all the plates came in, had to be sterilised and gone out, and I was in a little prison for about 4 to 5 weeks. And although I didn't feel unwell, I wasn't being sick or anything, I didn't have the best, the energy or whatever, but I wasn't unwell, but everything was quarantined.
And were you given any explanation as to why those steps were being taken?
No, they just said that these things happen, but they never connected it to the blood or the fact rate. It's just one of those things.
And you've provided other medical records to the inquiry which show references in the late 1970s and again in 1983 to abnormal liver function tests and liver disease. Were those matters ever drawn to your attention at the time?
No, none whatsoever.
Now, in June 1983, you received a letter. We're going to put that up on screen. It's 1577004, please, Paul. And we can see it's from the Coventry and Warwickshire Hospital. It's dated the 2nd of June 1983. It's addressed to you and it says this: I'm sure you are aware of the recent publicity about acquired immune deficiency syndrome, AIDS, and the possible risk of this occurring in haemophiliacs using factor VIII concentrate. We would like to monitor all our haemophiliacs because of this and would therefore be grateful if you could attend the blood bank, Walsgrave Hospital, on July the 12th between 9 and 9:30 a.m. for a blood test. We shall then be able to see you with the results of the test in the Haematology Outpatient Department, Coventry and Warwickshire Hospital on July the 19th at 3:15 p.m.
Yeah.
Now, when you received this letter, what do you recall thinking about it?
Well, first of all, when people were mentioning AIDS and HIV and stuff, and you think, well, that's somebody else. It never happens to you. So it was kind of pushed to one side in the first interim. But then when the doctors kind of said, well, it's a test that we're doing just to safeguard everybody, it didn't add any weight to this particular blood test, because you thought, well, inhibitor test, factor VIII level, it was along the same level and the same weight that they passed me this blood test. So I thought, well, they know what they're doing. So, let the experts carry on.
And you said in your statement, Suresh, it was a very general letter, and as I had blood tests all the time, I did not think anything of it.
No, absolutely nothing.
Now, you went for the blood test, but you didn't go back to receive the results in person. What happened?
The actual blood test was done at the end of the academic year, the college academic year. and then by the time the results were coming out, I said to the college that or the hospital that I won't be back because I finished my college, and I lived in Preston at the time. So I said, well, I won't be able to come back. He said, we'll arrange something anyway. So, but he said, we'll give you the results one way or the other. So I did the blood test, and by the time the results came out, or the result for the blood test came out, I was at university. You know, so I'm not sure how they tried to convey the information in the interim period. But anyway, they managed to get hold of me through the Birmingham records, the Birmingham hospitals. And then the nurse said, oh, well, you know, because we know you, I'll tell you over the phone. And it was my first year at university. I just got there. And they said, oh, by the way, it's just you're positive. So I thought, well, okay. So what does that mean? He said, well, first of all, what you need to do is, you know, have a word with your family. I thought, yeah, that's the normal thing to do because a family's close and we always do things together. I said, no, I understand, because my brother was alive then. So I thought, I'll talk to him and all that kind of stuff. So I said, well, I'll share the information. So I said, what else do I need to do? He said, well, you know, talk to your family. I said, you said that. Get your papers in order. I said, yeah, you said that. Well, we'll do that. And then I said, so what do I need to do as far as treatment's concerned? Oh, no, nothing. You can't do anything. You've only got 3 months. So if you just get your papers in order and get your life in order, then everything else is just fall into place. So I thought, I've just got 3 months to live. He goes, yeah, I'm afraid so. And it wasn't those words, but it was as blasé as that. It wasn't that this is a plan, come for some therapy or come for no counselling, because I don't think they were ever prepared for this kind of bombshell. And I think 3 months, and my brother had the same information, because whatever happened to me happened to him at the same time, and he ran away from home. He ran away, and he couldn't handle the information, and I remember speaking to my mum at the time, and she said, I don't know where he is. He said he's gone to London to say goodbye to his friends and family, but I don't know where he is. I said, well, I can't help because I'm in Coventry. Yeah, but I mean, within a couple of days he came back, but he had he had the only way he could handle it was to sort of get away from it, say goodbye to the ones that he won't be able to get to, and then family would come at the end.
When you've described your reaction to being given this diagnosis in this way and this prognosis as numb, lost, and absolutely shell-shocked.
Well, I mean, there wasn't any other way to feel, because at university I was away from the family. I was just creating friends, and it wasn't something that you could share. This kind of information you couldn't share any. You know, if you had a bit of a cold or something, you said, "Well, I've got a bit of a headache," and you know. But this was like a bombshell to anybody. You couldn't share this with the ones that you've just initiated a friendship with. You know, and that's the first way of isolation. And I thought, well, I can't tell that, and I kept myself to myself and made sure that whatever I did in kind of isolation or kept it as minimum as possible, because I didn't want my friends finding out. And also, I thought, well, I can't really do anything. I wasn't sure how to carry on with the first year of university. I thought, shall I carry on? Shall I, you know, I've got this grant. Do I back out? You know, because I won't be able to finish the course. I thought, well, if I'm enjoying it, then I might as well do as much as I can. And if the 3 months come and I have to leave, then at least it's 3 months of joy, and that's how I handle it. And 30 years went by.
Now that was 1983,
Yeah.
about the beginning of the university academic year, so perhaps in the autumn of 1983 that you received that news. How long was it before you received any kind of regular care or monitoring in relation to your HIV infection?
Around 89, 90, well, when the litigation was taking place, that's when they talked about, you know, doing sort of keeping a monitor on the blood test and all those kind of things. And so it was, but having said that, because I'd left Midlands because we lived in Preston, so Manchester was my care of my hospital of care. So because we were shifting, so I mean they had to get hold of my notes and they had to get a feel of where I was and stuff. So I'm not sure whether I wasn't made aware of the information because of the transfer or because it wasn't available. I mean, I can't give you that answer, but I mean, we didn't receive any treatment or any kind of support for the HIV till 89, 90.
In 1988, you met your wife.
Yes.
And you married in 1989, and
Yeah.
at that time you thought you would only have a short time to live.
Yeah.
You've said in your statement that Rebecca said she'd rather have a year of you than a boring life without you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think she regrets that now.
30 years on.
And you became a librarian in Preston.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the whole point of my study was that it was biochemistry. So, and then they had the option of genetic engineering, and like anybody with an idea to change the world and take it over, I thought, well, genetic engineering, I can work on the HIV virus, but then it took 5 years for me to finish my studies because I was ill all the time, and they had to throw me out. They said he's not going to finish, so they had to kick me out of university. But by the time I got out, they wanted people with experience, which I didn't have. So I thought about teaching, and it was too complicated. So librarian was the safer option.
And if we look at another document on the screen, please, Paul, 1577002. So it's the letter we've previously looked at, dated the 28th of December 1990. If we go to the second page, please, Paul. Thank you. So we can see that this letter says it's most likely that this man has non-A, non-B hepatitis C related chronic active hepatitis. It refers to arranging some screening tests and an ultrasound scan, and refers to headaches and treatment for that. And then in relation to interferon, the letter says this: although interferon has shown some encouraging effect in hepatitis C related liver disease, current protocols exclude patients who are HIV positive.
Yes.
Now, just pausing there, Suresh, this is the end of 1990,
Yes.
and the Manchester Royal Infirmary is writing, a senior registrar writing to Dr. Wensley, who was your consultant haematologist at the time, saying that it's likely that you have hepatitis
Yeah.
C. Were you told that?
No. The only reference was when I was ill in Coventry, and then the doctor saying, well, we need to put you on this interferon, but never did they mention that it was Hep C. It was just that your liver function test. Well, I mean, there could be tests for anything and results for anything. So and with any kind of numbers, you can make them up. And I didn't really understand what these tests referred to, what part of the body, and how relevant these numbers were. But never at any point did they say that it's Hep related.
And if we have another document on screen, it's 1577005. And this is a letter dated the 19th of November 1991. It's from the same senior registrar at the Manchester Royal Infirmary, this time to your GP. It refers to the biopsy and then says, and the possibility of cirrhosis, definite chronic active hepatitis. Yeah. He's therefore a candidate for interferon therapy. I'm going to arrange for a short admission in the near future to institute treatment with this drug. So we're roughly a year later,
Yeah.
late 1991. Were you told at that stage that you had chronic active hepatitis C?
No. They kept the only two things they kept saying is that your liver's enlarged and your spleen's enlarged, and those were the only references they made. But why they were enlarged, I mean, they never actually specified. But every time you laid down and start tapping your stomach, ooh, it's a bit big, and that's it. But nothing else.
And then if we have a further document on the screen, it's 1577008. This is a little earlier in 1990, so before the first document we looked at, October 1990. And we can see there reference to a chronic liver problem. This is from Dr. Wensley to, again, probably your GP. It says he's going to refer you, and you'll probably participate in a study of interferon that Dr. Warnes is carrying out at present.
Yeah.
Now, you did indeed embark upon
Yes.
your first course of treatment, and I'll ask you in a few minutes about the effects of that treatment. But in around 1991, you started interferon.
Yeah.
And you still didn't know that you had been diagnosed with hepatitis C at that point?
No, not whatsoever.
You understood it was for generally liver-related problems?
It was to address the liver function test, that's it.
And it was 1993 when you think you were finally told
Yeah.
you had hepatitis C?
Yeah, finally confirmed.
You've referred in your witness statement to feeling like a guinea pig in a trial in relation to this treatment. Why do you say that?
Well, I felt I felt like that then, but it's been kind of verified in the time that I've had the opportunity to sort of read my notes, in the sense that it talks about this trial, it talks about them carrying out this trial, but it also talks about it works for mono-infected, but it's no good for co-infected. You know, if you've got HIV, if you're positive with the HIV virus, it doesn't really work. So I have no idea why they put me on it. But then you look at the letter again, and it says my friend and colleague is trying out this trial. So was I just a number for the trial? You know, and just to see whether it works on a particular person who's co-infected. But I mean, I didn't want to be on a trial. I just wanted to be sorted.
And so what can you tell us about this first course of treatment with interferon that you underwent?
I think they called it alpha interferon, and it was in the early stages. And well, before they started the treatment, they said, "Oh, it's only no. Have you seen these the diabetic syringes?" I says, "Yeah." He said, "It's even smaller than that." I mean, so they're trying to compare that. You know, it's nothing to worry about. And I said, "Well, how much medicine should I have?" He said, "Well, it's only 3 drops. It's only this much. So it's that 3 times a week, and this is it'll be like having flu." I said, "Oh, yeah, you just feel a bit run down, but that's all you'll be." I said, "Well, I can cope with that," because I was working at the time. You know, I was a librarian. I was enjoying work, and then as soon as I had the treatment, within a couple of hours, I literally would be bedridden. And my head would get heavy. I'd have a headache, which lasted a couple of days. So by the time you actually came out the headache, it'd be trying for the next bout of treatment. And this height, I used to be about 9-10 stone. I went down to 7.5 stone or 7 stone. And I said to the doctor, I said, I can't cope. I says, this flu-like symptoms is killing me. And he says, "Well, obviously you've not had proper flu before." I thought, well, if it's like this, no, I don't think I have. You know, so, you know, but he kept saying it's just flu symptoms. But I have never had, because I'd be incapable of actually getting up. I'd just manage the bathroom, and then by the time I got back to the bed, I was shattered. You know, I just wasn't fit for anything.
And your statement says that you couldn't even stand up.
No, because as soon as I stood up, the head would get heavy, you know, and I just feel as if I'm going to faint. And I'd say to Rek, I said, "You know, get a chair here, otherwise I'll just collapse." I just couldn't stand up. And if anybody came, they'd have to sit in the next room. I couldn't, you know, the curtains had to be drawn. I felt like a vampire.
And then it was 1995 that you started AZT treatment for the HIV infection.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, I'm glad they didn't say flu-like symptoms, because that was similar. You know, I think they had the same phrase for everything. And the headache started, and they said, "Oh, it takes a couple of weeks for you to sort of ease into it." But the headaches never actually subsided. You know, ever since the interferon treatment, there was a mild headache all the time. And the AZT made me worse. It made me nauseous, but I was still trying to work and stuff. And you'd have the medication, and then you know, whilst I was working, I'd be saying, "Well, I just have to nip into the loo. I'll be back in a second." And you'd be sick in the loo, and you come back, you know, as if nothing had happened, and you'd start work again. And I just couldn't cope, you know. So they tried that for a short period, and I just physically couldn't cope with it. And I don't think it was making any difference to my viral load either. So. It was when they decided that they'd change it or do something. It was a blessing in disguise, you know.
1995 was also the year that your brother died.
Yeah.
In consequence of his HIV infection.
Yeah.
What would you like to tell us about what happened to him?
That was. I mean, he'd been ill for a while, and then in the last couple of months of his life, or 2 or 3 months of his life, was in Manchester Royal Infirmary, and he'd had all the tests. He'd been ill, you know. He was on steroids. He'd blown like a balloon, and he had an infection which they couldn't control. And it was this was prior to AZT and any of the treatments. And I don't think he would have been eligible for the treatment anyway. I don't think he could swallow the medication. But then the last days came, and there was, I don't know if anybody remembers, but there weren't that many respite care homes for people with HIV. The only one that existed was in Sussex, we lived in Preston. This was in Sussex, called Milburg Hall. I'm not sure whether it's still around or not, but that's the only place that existed, and they had to think about getting my brother from Manchester Royal Infirmary to Sussex, and they said, right, we'll have to fly him. They said, he needs that kind of care, specialist care, and we need to fly him there. And they said, oh, we can't fly him because he won't be able to take the pressure, so because it'll make him bleed. So I thought, okay, so what do we do? And then they came to the decision that they'll have a blue light, and they'll blue light him all the way from Manchester to Milburg Hall, and he stayed there for a couple of days. Now, it was too far for, because I was on treatment, I wasn't well, so we couldn't go and see him every day. But on this particular day, as the world would have it, it was one of these, the old phones where you put the receiver back on and we hadn't put the receiver back, and the hall kept bringing us up to say that your brother's not well, you need to come and see him, but they couldn't get through. So a friend of ours in a similar position as me came to the house, and I said, "What are you doing here?" And he goes, "Well, they've been trying to get hold of you for the past 3 hours, and nobody's picking the phone up." I said, "Oh, it's off the hook." I was supposed to be a best man at a wedding the day after, and we kept saying that we can't manage. He says, "Well, you're the only brother we have." I thought, all right then. But then, when Praffle was ill, I said, "Well, we have to leave now," and it took us 6 hours to get from Preston to Milburg Hall, and we got there at 6 o'clock in the morning, and he'd passed away at 4.
You've described in your statement how throughout the 1990s you attended many funerals of people who you had known with haemophilia who had been infected and who died. I can take it from your statement if you like.
Yeah, just a little bit.
You said this: I've been to around 90 funerals in total, but there was one heavy year where I attended 70 funerals of people who were part of the haemophilia community, one of them being my own brother's. I was very close to my brother. He was like my right-hand man. The heartache was too difficult to cope with. There came a point when I was going to so many funerals, you automatically start thinking you're going to be next. It is like playing Russian roulette, and after a certain amount of time, you know the bullet is going to come for you. Every week there was somebody passing away, one after the other, and then another and another.
Yeah. I mean, each one of them was like a brother, and you felt if you didn't attend, then you were doing a disservice because you let your brother down. But then if you do attend, you see all the people and the families that were destroyed.
And you've described in your statement a particular memorial?
Oh, the Woodlands Trust.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, after we kind of we had a heavy year of these the funerals and stuff, and my fellow brethren here will support that. But after that, we the co-infected, because we were dying at such a rate. There were certain key individuals. There were certain key individuals who decided that it'd be nice to have a memorial, and the Woodlands Trust was created, and we planted. I mean, we say 1,200 trees, but we planted a few more than that. And it was a woodland trust that was created for people to go and make peace with what had happened. And there's a bench there and a stone there, and there's somewhere that you can come to terms.
In 2003, Suresh, you were told about the risk of VCJD. And we'll just look at a document on screen.
Yeah.
It's 1577006. Please, Paul. And we can see here, it's a letter dated the 16th of May 2003 from Dr. Hay, and it's sent to your GP.
Yes.
And it says, I'm writing to inform you that we've recently been notified that factor 8/9 concentrate supplied to this patient some years ago was manufactured from a plasma pool which included a donation from a patient who subsequently developed variant CJD. There is a small theoretical risk of transmission of variant CJD by this route. There are currently no patients with bleeding disorders who've been shown to contract variant CJD in this way, and this risk is at present thought to be extremely low and possibly non-existent. And then it goes on to talk about national policy to offer the patient the opportunity to be told whether they'd received such a product or not. Now, that came to your attention and you did elect to be told.
Yeah.
You went to a meeting. What can you recall about that meeting?
It was normally the room is it's a small, I mean, normal sized office, and there'll be just enough room for the doctor, for the consultant, myself and my wife, and ordinarily you'd go there and he'll go through the notes, and he'd go on his dictaphone and say somebody's been playing football with Suresh's notes because they were all a mess, and every time we went they were always in a mess. But anyway, on this particular day, we were expecting something similar. We thought, we were expecting some feedback on this letter, but he says, "Oh, I've got a few more doctors. Would you mind?" And in the past, what had happened was that rarely do you find anybody who's got a they call palpable, anybody they can feel a liver and a spleen. So I mean, it was a rarity on it. So you were a special case. So I thought there's going to be a few doctors, and there'll be a handful of doctors who can just check me out and all that kind of stuff. When we got there, it was standing room only. There were so many doctors in this room, and I thought you said a few doctors. He says yes, but word spread a bit. And they were standing room only, and the guy says, "Oh, you don't mind them being there, do you?" And I thought, not really. So we sat down, and he goes, "We just wanted to." So I thought, because there were so many doctors there, I thought he'd delay this information till the next time. So I thought, well, okay. So we sat there and I thought, how's the test? And things are going well, this, that, and the liver function tests aren't doing well again. I thought, okay, so what's new? And then as time went by, and I thought, is that it? I'll get up. So, and one more thing. And bearing in mind that normally these sessions take 10 minutes maximum. You're in and out. You're on a conveyor belt. And just as I was getting up, it's just one more minute, Suresh, and then we'll go through these notes. Once again, notes are in all over the place. I talk about my HIV medication, and then 45 minutes later, I said, "Is there something you want to ask? Is there something?" He says, "Oh, I'm glad you've mentioned it. There is something." I said, "This about this VCJD." He says, "You said you wanted to know," and I said, "Well, yeah." And he goes, "I'm afraid you've been one of the unlucky recipients." I said, is there anything we can do about it? I said, is there anything you can do about it? He said, no, nothing. Then it's nothing for me to worry about, then, is it? Because if you can't change anything, then knowing, and then I'll just go. 45 minutes in a room, and I mean, with the number of people there, it was claustrophobic. I thought, well, let us go, because you're not going to change anything. So, it took him. It took him almost an hour to share the news. And I thought, it's only when I left the office, I thought, if he found it hard, then it adds weight to the letter, But he only clicked afterwards, Otherwise, I'd have addressed it there and then.
That was 2003. In 2004, you gave up work as a librarian.
Yeah.
Because you weren't able to due to the physical effects of your illnesses.
That's right.
And can you give us some sense of the physical effects of both the hepatitis C and the HIV by this stage?
Some of the what we were finding was that the HIV medication was complicating some of the liver function tests. Excuse me. So my fact rate was being broken down at a faster rate than normal. So I'd have to have double the dose for half the effect. So that was happening. And now whether it's part of the liver or whatever, but I also had a platelet dysfunction. So I mean, all these things contributed to the number of bleeds I was having, and on top of with the Hep C, I was getting my joints were hurting, the whole body was aching all the time, and if I'd gone to work, I'd get there, and then if I was talking, I'd forget what I was saying, and I'd think, what was I talking about? And this is a presentation. You're in front of all these people, and you're asking them what you're talking about. I thought, this isn't right. And it got to a point where I just couldn't cope with getting up. The body wasn't getting the rest that it needed. It wasn't recovering. And fair play to my work. They said, "Oh, Suresh, I think we've seen the." They on my behalf spoke to the occupational therapist, and they said that you qualify for early retirement. Take it. I said, well, no, but I'm enjoying work. And what they were saying is that it's not doing you any favours. But they didn't want to be rude or disrespectful, so they allowed me to carry on, which I commend them. But it was draining me, and I really wasn't looking after myself, and I was just running myself to the ground.
And you had a second course of treatment for the hepatitis C in 2007.
Yeah.
Interferon and ribavirin at that stage.
Yeah. They wanted to try and start the treatment in Manchester when we lived in Preston, but at the time they wanted to start it, we were planning to leave the northwest for Midlands, to live in Leicester, and I said, well, I don't want to start the treatment and then move halfway, because I don't know what care I'll be given there. It was all very different. So I said, I'll start it when I go to Leicester. So as soon as I got there, the health care that we got in Leicester was second to none. We had specialists from the HIV team that would look at the medicines and what complemented your holistic approach. Then we had the liver guys, and then the hematologist, and all these people, all specialists in their own field, looking at you as from their individual point of view. And they immediately changed my medication. They said, "Oh, well, you need to start this treatment straight away." So I thought, fine, but because I should have started it a few months back, and because my HIV medication wasn't what it was supposed to be, my health was 100%. So as soon as I started it, my platelets went down to almost zero. My white blood cell count was almost nothing, and I was just bleeding all the time. They couldn't stop me bleeding, and with all the additional bleeding problems. They were saying, if we carry on with the treatment, it says, we'll lose you. So we stopped it, and that was only 3 months down the line. So that was the second lot of treatment.
And your spleen became enlarged. What can you tell us about that?
That was we realised that was the major cause of all the problems, because all along the way they kept saying that your spleen's large, your liver's large, and but they didn't, because I was bleeding so much. They thought if we operate, we'll never stop him bleeding. So that was one of the reluctance to carry on. But one of the consultants there at Leicester Royal Infirmary, and Dr. Stevenson, he said, if we don't operate, you're going to die. So we have nothing to lose. The choice we have in our hands is to get the right doctor. And my wife, Rekha, asked, he says, if you were in this position, who would you get to do the operation? And there was a guy called Professor Lloyd, and he said he would be the man I'd put this job into. I would put it into his hands. But unfortunately, he was away on holiday. So he said, what we'll do is we'll have this bed available for you 24 hours a day, and he was on holiday for 2 weeks. They kept a bed aside, and he said, if you need it, this is where you're going to be. So we hung on, and then we had to see as soon as the guy came back, he had to do a pre-assessment. And I just, it got to a stage where I couldn't breathe. I didn't have enough space in my stomach to breathe. And we hung on till this doctor came and says, right, what we're going to do is we're going to take your spleen out, we're going to take, do all these things. But the spleen's meant to be the size of this glass here, and it was the size of a football. It was 5 kilograms, and I just couldn't stand up,
After that was removed in 2008, you went on the waiting list for a liver transplant.
Yeah. Ideally, they would have liked to have done the transplant there and then, but my body wouldn't have taken it. I was too weak.
And by the stage you had cirrhosis of the liver.
Yeah.
And then you embarked, after the removal of the spleen, on a third course of treatment for the hepatitis C, interferon and ribavirin again.
Yeah.
But you also had to stop that. What happened on that occasion?
Well, similar things, because I wasn't strong enough to I just hadn't built my inner strength up. I was still bleeding, and I mean, going back to that splenectomy, you know, at the time we had to do the spleen, the biopsy, and I had varices. All three surgeons working at the same time, but the varices never stopped because the liver was still a problem. So when the third treatment came along, I still had varices, so I kept bleeding all the time. And in a space of a week, I had 25 units of blood, and it just seemed to disappear. It just went away. I was just bleeding that much, and the hospitals were worried that, you know, if we give him too much blood, then he'll have organ failure and iron poisoning. But if you don't give him enough, he'll faint. And they couldn't find a balance. They didn't know what to do. So on the third one, we kind of it was meant to be a 48-week, because if you're co-infected, it's a 48-week trial. So we did 3, maybe 4 months of it, and once again we had to close it down because I just couldn't, you know, they couldn't stop me bleeding.
And you then embarked on a 4th course of treatment for your hepatitis C in 2010. And that cleared hepatitis C in 2011. And what was the experience in relation to that 4th course of treatment?
Well, it was another 48-week course, but this time I managed to do about 40 weeks of it, so we almost completed it. But near the end, the same problems were happening again. I was losing blood and all that kind of stuff. And then the doctors in Leicester, because it was this time, it was the Birmingham Hospital, the Queen Elizabeth, that was managing everything. And they said they consulted with a doctor over there called Dr. Mutimer. And they said, well, you know, he's having all these problems. What do we do? He says, well, if he's having that many problems, stop it. I thought, well, that seems simple enough. So after 40 weeks, they stopped the treatment. And I'd cleared it after the first 12 weeks or whatever it was. I can't remember the date. And then they said, well, let's not celebrate yet because it can come back. So we kind of delayed the celebrations and then waited another few more months after the treatment. And then they said it was cleared.
And although you've remained clear of the virus ever since, you say in your statement the damage done to your liver is irreparable.
Oh, it's absolutely irreparable because it left me with cryoglobular anemia. So in the winter periods, you know, when people talk about, you know, are frozen stiff, I literally do. I'm frozen stiff. I can't move because the fats in the body just solidify.
And you also suffer from osteopenia.
Yeah, but that was because the Hep C it sort of damaged the bones, and they did a DEXA scan, which is the normal thing, and they found that was there. And also there's because of the treatment and the liver problems, I suffer from something called arthralgia, which all the joints hurt and the bones hurt, and because they're weak in the first place, you know, come winter time I just hibernate.
And you also suffered from memory loss throughout or through parts of the hepatitis C treatment. Has that remained with you?
I think that after the third, between the third and the third and the fourth, you know, memory fog. People have spoken about memory fog and stuff, but I think it was because one treatment after the other. There was a period where I lost. I forgot things. I lost my memory. I could remember Rekha, I could remember my mum. But if people came in, I'd think, well, I know the face, I know, but I don't know who they are. You know, and this is my own family. You know, and I'd have to think, sit and think for a while, and then I said, well, I recognise the face, and then I have to place them in a point in time, and I think, oh yeah, this is my auntie. You know, and there's all these kind of things, and they'd look back and say, well, he didn't, you know, he was a bit rude, he didn't say anything because I didn't recognise you. You know, it was very, very difficult. You know, and it's not something you can tell people because they'd say, well, you're only suffering flu, you know.
And then in terms of the HIV medication that you've received over the years since the initial AZT, you've had a number of complications. You've had an allergy or allergic reaction.
Yeah.
You've had HIV drugs which increased your bleeding times.
Yeah.
And you ended up very limited in terms of what HIV medication you're able to tolerate.
Yeah. But apart the inherent problems, I also have this G6PD deficiency. So a number of the drugs that you're supposed to have, I'm not allowed, and Septrin is one of them. So it goes back to people for PCP they give pentamidine and stuff, which is an inhaler. So I'm not allowed to have that. So I've got to be extra vigilant that I manage all my ailments properly. I forgot the question.
I think you've answered it. It
Oh.
was simply about the HIV treatment
Yeah.
and the complications you've...
One of the complications was that there was one called ephedrins, and you start hallucinating, and I didn't sleep for 7 weeks. I just couldn't sleep. Come 10 o'clock at night, I'd be panicking because I know I've got 6 or 7 hours that I just didn't know what to do with, And then in the middle of the night, in the daytime, the television's on, and there's a bit of noise, and you can get through the day. But come night time, especially 3 or 4 in the morning, you start thinking, all these weird and horrible thoughts start entering your head, and you think, well, and it's only when you're within the 4 walls of your life that you start making sense of certain things, and you think, am I a burden? Should I be living? You start questioning why you're there in the first place, because if you can't add value, then you take it away. And it was a simple equation in my life.
And you said in your witness statement, Suresh, that in terms of the hepatitis C treatments, although you had all the physical symptoms that you've described, you said this: I couldn't have any mental effects from the hepatitis C at the time because physically I was so ill.
I was just so exhausted. I mean, one has to think about the things that are not going well in your life for you to know that you're in a bit of problem. But if you haven't got the facility to think, you can't fall into the trap. And I wasn't well enough to think. I just wasn't well enough to, as soon as I got up, I'd be having a treatment. As soon as I got up, I'd be going to the hospital. As soon as I got up, I'd be falling because I'd be fainting. All these things were happening, and I didn't have the time to think about what I was going through. Rekha did, because she was there all the time, but I had no idea of the concept of time. So for me, one day merged into another, and I just didn't think about the position that I was in. And one could say that it's a blessing in disguise because you didn't think about it. But I was just too ill to be mentally scarred in that way. Not at the time. Now I think back, and now I've got time to be depressed. At that time, I just didn't have the energy all the time. It just was awful.
What's the impact been on your dental and medical care of the infections and of the risk of BCJD?
Well, it took me. Well, when we moved to Leicester, as soon as you mentioned that, the hepatitis was the first thing, but Leicester were very good. I mean, they said, oh, we can cope with that. But as soon as you mentioned BCJD, said, we'll have a look at the register, and then we'll get back to you, and they never did. So we tried a few dentists, and they never got back to us. So it's a problem that we laid at the hospital's doorstep, and they managed to find somebody for us. But the funniest thing, and out of all of HIV, out of all the Hep C, the VCJD element is the bit that's meant. It's made me feel the worst in the sense that as a person, because I mean, in all the Hep C treatments and all that, because I was bleeding, I had varices. They had to find out where they were, so I'd have to have a camera down the throat, a camera in all the other orifices, and I had my own camera with my own name on. And as soon as I went in, he said, "It's Suresh. Shall we get Suresh's camera out?" So, and then on one occasion, I thought, oh, my own camera, that's all right. And then, because I bled again, they said, "Oh, where's Suresh's camera?" Well, we had to throw it away because we weren't too sure about the cross-contamination. So they chucked the camera away. And then I thought, oh, just because my name was on it. So the second time, and then the third time we went there, and they said, oh, Suresh, I know we've got you in. We had to do all the preparation, the bowel preparation and all that kind of stuff. But your camera's over in another hospital because we couldn't keep it with the others. We had to keep it separate. And it's still there. We didn't cart it here. So we've got you here, but we're not ready for you, so you'll have to come back another day. And then the third time I came, it says the other hospital didn't know what to do, so they threw it away. So they threw 3 cameras, and this is the only time. I mean, people have said it in the past that they felt dirty. This was one of the few times that I actually felt dirty and inhumane, in the sense that, I felt like an animal. You know, so, and that's, you know, but HIV's never done that to me. But this one particularly, it just, you know, and I suppose when you're down and somebody says something, it hurts more.
Can I ask you what the effects of your infection's been on your family life and your plans to have children?
I mean, it's all the viruses together it's cost the whole of the family everything. You know, in the early days, around 1998, 99, my wife we felt pregnant with our little baby, and it was a time when we were going when I wasn't well, and the doctors kept saying, you know, yeah, it's very good news, but. You know, it says, do you want to be looking after him, or do you want to be looking after the baby, or if the baby's infected, the baby's got, you know, so they, instead of saying, well, all these positive things are happening, it's all the negative stuff, you know, you'll have this burden on your hands, and they didn't push us in the direction, but they kind of gently persuaded us that that's the direction you need to be going in, and once we sort of made our mind up that, you know, we couldn't cope with our illness, and we couldn't cope with having the extra pressure of looking after somebody. And if anything happened, we wouldn't have been able to forgive ourselves. So we chose to abort the baby, you know. And I think the doctors were ever so pleased. You know, that's how we felt. I'm not sure. I'm speaking on their behalf, and it's not my position to do that. But I think it was a relief for them. So, I mean, as far as the family is concerned, we were stopped for having a family. But, I mean, I come from a kind of a proud Indian background. We look after our parents, we look after our elders. And when my brother passed away, it was absolute bedlam in the sense that everything, all the probate, all this, it was an absolute nightmare. And I just felt that if the doctors kept saying, he said, "Oh, you're not 100%, you're not 100%." I thought, well, if anything happens to me, how's the family going to cope? You know, especially with the McFarlane Trust saying that, you know, whilst the infected is alive, you get all this money, you get support, but as soon as you pass away, the widow gets nothing. They get a bit of a pat on the back saying, well, thank you for looking after him, but now on your way. So I thought, well, I've got to settle my mum and dad down. So we took the option of, you know, saying to my mum and dad that we need to settle you in a residential home. We need to settle ourselves down. So if there's any upheaval, then at least my parents were settled. And then if anything happened, then at least Rekha would have a home to her name. And I'd be happy wherever I was, knowing that my family's safe. You know, so we had to take the decision of dividing the family, you know, all for the sake of making sure that they had a decent life. But all this was unnecessary because, you know, even now to this day, we feel that, you know, and it's a very cultural thing, that we've let the parents down because we're separated. But you think of the best thing you can do for your family, and that was the best we can do.
You've said in your statement, Suresh, that the worst thing of everything has been the stigma that you faced, and that stigma has been worse in the Asian community.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate upon that?
Yeah, I mean, stigma has been bad across the community. I mean, you couldn't, you know, you couldn't talk about it openly, but within the Asian community, it's very tight knit. So whatever you do, the next door neighbour knows. Before you sneeze, they know. Before you do this, they know. So when I mean, even at my brother's, when my brother passed away, as soon as we came back to set, because the customary thing is you set the house out and then all the family come and pay their respects, and it was in the news that HIV and haemophilia and all this, and the first thing that somebody said was, you know, I've been listening to the news. Did Prof pass away from AIDS? And I thought, well, this isn't the time nor the place, and it's not for me to sort of divulge. So I said, no, we were lucky. We didn't. You know, I couldn't even share that with my own family. I said, no, we were lucky. We weren't troubled in that way. You know, but so throughout our lives, we've had to keep it a secret in the sense that if people knew, then then we'd be ostracised, and my parents would have to feel the brunt of it, because they are the ones, for the youngsters nowadays, you can brush it aside, but for my parents, community and family are the be-all, end-all, and if they were put to one side, so we had to keep everything hush-hush. We couldn't talk about it, we couldn't mention it when family were there, and it was a very isolated life, and many a times you although you didn't want to, because you think, well, you've got to stand up for what you believe in. It's not something I could do. Not with everything else I can stand and fight, but I couldn't do it with this.
And you described the impact overall as being the viruses that you were infected with took away your immediate happiness and also your future happiness.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at normal families, and you look at how they're playing, and the grandparents looking after the kids, and then you have this circle of life that takes place, and we look after my mum's still around. My dad passed away in 2009, and we look after my mother, but there'll come a time when she's no longer around. Then we'll get older. Then who looks after us?
Carry on.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you've got to have children to sort of, because sometimes, but at times, the families live through the children. There'll come a time when we rely on our nieces and nephews, but we don't have our own kids. We have wonderful children who we call our own, and they are our own. But I mean, there'll come a time when we'll be on our own, and for us, I think others have the luxury of all this taking place, and they can fall back on a cushion that they've created for ourselves, and they've created for themselves, and they've not been blighted by any of this, whereas we've had that taken away. So there'll come a time when a lonely time when there'll be Rekha and myself, and you think, well, yeah, we didn't have much of a life. So we didn't have a life now, and the future's been taken away because we didn't have any kids, and you think, well, how much of a price does one have to pay for somebody else's mistake, and it just seemed huge, and you think, well, there has to be, do people talk about glass ceilings and that there's a limit to, there's never been a limit to the damage that this has caused, because I can see, whenever I think, well, it can't get any worse than this, I hear stories. I hear stories, and they're worse than mine. And you think, well, I thought that was the limit. There's another one.
One final topic I wanted to ask you about, Suresh, and it relates to your experiences of making applications to the schemes.
Oh.
And you said that in your experience you've had to jump through hurdles and hoops.
Yeah, I mean, to the public, when the McFarlane, Skipton, Eileen, whichever trust you talk about, on paper they sound fantastic, and we'll support you in this and we'll support you in that, and on paper, if you were a layman looking at it from the outside world, they think, what are this family of people complaining about? But when you're making the application, you've got to get 3 quotes, you've got to do this. When you're not well, you have to, and you have to go through all that. How can you make these applications? You've got to be fit enough to make the application. You've got to be vigilant enough to make sure that you've got the right quote, and you've made all the you crossed the T's and dotted the I's and all those kind of things. And also you've got to have a level of education. You've got to you've got to have that ability to sort of make sure that you're getting the right deal. Because if you make a mistake, they won't rectify the mistake. That's your fault. So. You had to be in a position where you were sharp enough to be a negotiator, sharp enough to be a business person, sharp enough to be everything. But they didn't realise that you were ill. You just couldn't manage all these things. You were not a business person, and yet they wanted somebody.
It's okay. Take your time.
they wanted somebody who was a business person to make the application, and it just made things so difficult, you know. And then even when you got the money, if you said you wanted X thousand, they'll say, well, I'm sure you get it cheaper. It'll be X thousand minus 1,000. Well, where do you get the 1,000 from? You know, if I could afford it, I wouldn't be making the application. You know, so either you pay the full amount or nothing, but don't leave me in limbo. And that was the same for everybody. You know, so whatever the amounts they did dish out wasn't enough. You know.
And that was, I think, your experience when the McFarlane Trust was winding down. You made an application. They did provide you with some money, but it was less than the amount you'd asked for.
Yeah, I mean, they said, all right, we've got this money which we need to use up, so this will be your last application, so make it, and then you won't be able to apply for anything else. So I made my application, and I'm waiting for a shoulder transplant, the elbow, the knee, and all these things, and I couldn't get out of my house. I couldn't get into the garden, you know. So there was a step that needed creating, but we've got a funny kind of a garden. They said, oh, it'll cost about 10,000 to get it all piled up and levelled and all that kind of stuff. So I said, well, you know, I've got 3 quotes, and 10,000 was the cheapest. So right, we'll give you 8.5. I thought, well, that isn't good for man nor beast. You know, where do I get the extra 1.5 from? So I had to go beg and borrow from my mother. You know, but why should she have to compensate for you know, because whatever it costs, that's what it costs. It's not a number I'm plucking out the air. But I mean, yeah, they said, oh, we'll give you that plus minus a discount.
You were involved in the UK litigation that ended in a compromise, and you recall signing a waiver.
Oh yes.
That said you wouldn't provide, you wouldn't bring any other proceedings against the government. Is that your recollection?
Yeah.
And that was, you think, in around 1991?
Somewhere around there.
And that was the particular point in time where you had hepatitis C, you'd been diagnosed with hepatitis C, you were being treated for hepatitis C, but you didn't know any of them.
No, that's right.
And those were the circumstances in which you signed that waiver.
That's right. Because they just mentioned HIV, and it was on the proviso that, you know, it was like one of these double glazed salesperson. If you sign now, you get this fantastic deal, and if I don't sign now, then, you know, he won't get it, they won't get it, and it'll be your fault. So there was this emotional blackmail taking place, and you think, well, you know, I might be able to get mine, but my friends might not. So I'll sign the deal. Plus, I'm only going to be alive for another couple of months. So, you know, what the heck? You know, I might as well get the money, get my friends to have the money, and you know, we can all have a decent life. And so we signed the waiver, but they knew full well that we're all Hep C, because from 78, 79 onwards, there was these question marks. You know, and come 1990, they were all fully versed in what we did have and what we didn't have, so they knew exactly what they were getting us into. Yeah, absolutely.
Suresh, those are my questions for you. Is there anything you would like to add?
There is something, if I'm allowed to. There's something I prepared, if that's all right.
Yes.
But guys, you'll have to bear with me because I might stop a couple of times. But if is it all right? Shall I read that?
Yes.
Thank you. I won't take much more of your time, but Rec and I wanted to say a huge thank you to you all for being here. We know your personal pains and the struggles are far greater than what you share with us, with those around you. Yet you chose to you chose to put these aside. You left your loved ones in order to support this historic event. There can be no bigger sacrifice than this. And for that we will always be indebted. Over the course of these hearings, it's been said that a unique bond existed between those infected and affected, and our doctors, and some might find it difficult to comprehend the depth and breadth of this profound relationship. This relationship was forged out of trust in the hope of ensuring and securing the best possible care for oneself or one's loved ones, and certainly not of relinquishing one's responsibilities or duties. Unfortunately, over time, this trust formed a chain of habits that was too light to be felt until such time that it was too heavy to be broken. It's also been said that we are a community, which is so true. But from what we see, and what we've always seen, is that we are a family first and foremost, a family that was born out of extraordinary circumstances, from much shared and much more lost. And despite all that we've been pulled through and dragged through, we have continued to fight for each other, and we've continued to fight for each other, and united in our battles, we have managed to bring about this mammoth task. This moment of history created because we are a family unlike any other, and definitely unlike any the government has ever seen. The government's stubbornness and unwillingness to bend is what has fueled our fight, and just like the kite that rises highest against the wind, not with it, will continue to be there till the very end. This incredible family of ours has breathed life into this inquiry, building its very own door on which to knock upon. It has given itself the opportunity It has given itself an opportunity to question the ethics of those in positions of power and ask them who gave them the right to play God. We are truly humbled to be here, for allowing us the time to share our story with you, but more importantly for listening. If at any stage we have overstepped our mark, we apologise, as we know that we've been through it, and it would be heartless for us to add any more. There have been others far more deserving who should be sat here far more deserving who should be sat here in this chair, and on their behalf and in their memory, we extend our heartfelt appreciation and gratitude. Thank you so very much, Suresh and Rekha.
Suresh, I'm just going to ask Mr. Snowden if there are any further questions he wants to ask. Suresh, just one question, and it goes back to the questions I was asking you about the waiver that you signed.
Yeah.
Were you ever given any advice or warning about waiving claims for hepatitis C at that point in time when you think the NHS or the government were aware of the risk?
No, the only thing they mentioned was HIV, and they said that, but if anything else comes in, they did say anything else, but they never mentioned any names, but they were fully aware of what they were. So that, but if anything else comes in the future, then you've waived your right to that. So they did put that down, but at the time we just thought HIV was the worst thing you'd ever get. What else could be more worse than that? And that's what we were left with.
Thank you.
Well, Suresh, thank you very much indeed for speaking. You thanked us for listening, but thank you for speaking.
That's very kind. Thank you. Thank you for all your time.
Tomorrow it's a 10:30 start.
Yes, sir.
And what do we have tomorrow?
So we have two anonymous witnesses. So we have Mr. O, I think we're at. Then we have Susan Harrison, and then we have Ms. P.
You? So 10:30 for Mr. O.